Well, perhaps no figure appreciated more fully FDR's leadership in mobilizing a business and the American economy than Winston Churchill, the great British Prime Minister. He actually came and spent weeks at a time in a bedroom diagonally across from FDR's during World War II, joining FDR in his famous cocktail hour, which he had every single night during World War II, with the rule that you could not talk about the war. You could talk about books you'd seen, you could talk about movies, gossip, as long as the war didn't come out, so he could have for a few minutes some relaxing moments. And into this cocktail hour, the people he wanted to be there were so important to him that he actually had them come and live in the White House so they'd be ready for the cocktail hour. So Harry Hopkins, his foreign policy advisor, came for dinner one night, stayed over, never left until the war came to an end. Missy LeHand, his secretary, who'd loved him from the time she was 18, lived with the family in the White House. Princess Martha from Norway, who was in exile in America during the war, came and lived with the family on the weekends. Lorena Hickok, a journalist, a woman journalist who loved Eleanor Roosevelt, had a bedroom next to Eleanor's. And of course, Winston Churchill was enjoying not only the cocktail hour, but would stay up until 2 a.m. with FDR drinking and smoking until Eleanor would come in and say, "Isn't it time for you two little boys to go to bed?" Well, when I was working on the book on Franklin and Eleanor, I became so obsessed with the thought of all these crazy, wonderful people in their bathrobes at night on the second floor of the White House corridor, and what amazing conversations they must have had, and kept wishing when I'd been up there with Lyndon Johnson, I thought of asking, where did Churchill sleep? Where was Roosevelt? Where was Harry Hopkins? But of course, I wasn't thinking in those terms then. So I mentioned this on a radio program in Washington, and it happened that Hillary Clinton was listening. So she promptly called me up at the radio station and invited me to sleep overnight in the White House. She said we could then wander the corridor and figure out where everyone had slept 50 years earlier. So a couple weeks later, she followed up with an invitation to a state dinner, after which between midnight and 2 a.m., the president, Mrs. Clinton, my husband, and I went through every room up there with my map in hand and figured out, yes, Chelsea Clinton is sleeping where Harry Hopkins once slept. Bill Clinton is sleeping where FDR was, and we were in Winston Churchill's bedroom, which meant there was no way I could sleep. I was certain that he was sitting in the corner drinking his brandy and smoking his ever-present cigar. In fact, that bedroom is the scene of my favorite story in World War II. When Churchill came there, right after Pearl Harbor, he and Roosevelt were set to sign a document that put the Allied nations against the Axis powers. But the Allied nations were calling themselves then the Associated Nations, and no one liked the word. So early that morning, Roosevelt awakened with the whole new idea of calling themselves the United Nations. He was so excited he had himself wheeled into Churchill's bedroom to tell him the news. But Churchill was just coming out of the bathtub and had absolutely nothing on. So Roosevelt said, "I'm so sorry, I'll come back in a few moments." Churchill, ever able to speak in a very formal voice, said, "Oh no, please stay. The Prime Minister of Great Britain has nothing to hide from the President of the United States." Can you imagine? You are dripping from the tub, your stomach is sticking out, and you have the ability to say something like that? So then Roosevelt tells him the idea of the United Nations. He embraces it at once, has the further presence of mind to quote an entire poem in British literature where the words United Nations had once been used. So that night, as soon as the president, Mrs. Clinton, left, I couldn't wait to go into the bathtub. And then I truly felt I was in the presence of the greatness of the past.